I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Welcome to the Gilchrist experience. As you see, that was Malcolm's, we're talking about January 1965. Malcolm died the following month, February 1965. So as you see, Malcolm in his later days matured. He turned away about all white people were devils, and that Martin wasn't an Uncle Tom, and that, you know, we have to work together as a people in order to succeed. So we all go through a transformation. I mean, I came out of 65, I'd been out of the Corps a year. I was working for Chase Manhattan Bank. I mean, I was in the middle of everything. I was in society. I wasn't a revolutionary. I was a house Negro. You know, but I spent that 4 years, 60 to 64, in the Marine Corps. And he's my same age, so he has a different tale of those days. So what do you say, Brother Leroy?
Well, it's correct in terms of Malcolm maturing. There are a lot of aspects to that. And that maturing is like fast aging. Mm-hmm. If there was such a thing as fast aging wine or meat, the experiences that he had, the near-death experiences that he had, where he went, people he met, and the reality. But I would say in terms of, quote, revolutionary house Negro, all of us who wanted to do better in life, mm-hmm. and to please our parents, or to be, right. That our parents would have pride in us. I'm talking mm-hmm. about coming through that period. We were in jobs that no one else, that's right. no black person had ever been in, whatever that job was.
That's right.
And that was a phenomenal time. So who you are today is what you were then, but there was a different context, mm-hmm. in my opinion. Oh, yeah. In my opinion, you know, you're not somebody who overnight became conscious. No. It took a little bit to move you.
Well, we as blacks were in a completely different category. Yeah. I mean, the blacks in the 60s. I might introduce to you Chris Noble. And this is Gil Noble's son. It's an esteemed pleasure to have you here today. I mean, we're going over your father's era, and we're going to play a couple of pieces by him. But it's such a pleasure to have you here today. I mean, that was my idol. That was my man. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was my brother. I mean, he led the course and what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. I mean, people flatter me when they say you're doing like Gil Noble. I said, whoa. I get, that's real. I mean, but I'm flattered because I so wanted to be like him. Because he exposed us to ourselves. He brought out information that we had no idea existed. You know, Leroy and I were talking about when we were raised, you know, the pyramids were built by bricks, you know, straw. They crushed the Ten Commandments. We all believed that stuff. I mean, that's the 50s to blacks. We had no idea. We knew Tarzan.
Yeah, I was listening to what you said about being a house Negro, and I don't really agree with that. I think that, you know, this global system of white supremacy was designed to keep all of us asleep. And so the transition to consciousness is a really delicate process, and sometimes it happens by accident. I heard Dr. Clark talk about how he became conscious. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said that he was a perfect fool as a young man until he woke up.
That's right.
Dr. Ben, who came from the Virgin Islands in Puerto Rico, he says as a young man he was clueless.
Right.
And he bumped into the information that woke him up. Assata Shakur, who went through a white school system, a Catholic school, was completely clueless until she went to college and took a Black History course.
That's right.
And she said, wow. And she found herself.
That's right.
So it's a very, and these are critical thinkers. These are some of our greatest thinkers. Just imagine if, you know, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima never woke up, or Dr. Ben never woke up. The system is designed to keep us asleep. So I don't consider you ever a house Negro. You were just a victim of the system. This system has been working on us for hundreds of years, and it's extremely effective. And it plants our appetites for things that we want, things that we think about, things that we desire. There's a lot of layers to that through the education system, through the media, through the what's happening in our inner city neighborhoods, with 1 out of 3 black men being incarcerated. So that's decimated the black family. So you have all of these things going on that continue to work against us and to break us down. So it's amazing when we break through. So that's the way I look at it. I just think that, you know, it's Malcolm. Look at Malcolm. Malcolm was clueless, and he was heading down a lane that, you know, would have never produced what we got if he hadn't woken up. And if he hadn't met that brother in prison who woke him up, we wouldn't have had Malcolm. My father woke up by accident, just like everybody else in this studio. It's by accident. He started.
Let's show a clip of your father waking up. This is interesting. Play Gil Noble, #1. Again, this is about Malcolm X and our vision of what Malcolm was like. All right?
First inoculation was Dr. King. And then that led me to Adam Powell and a lot of the people. But I was put off by Malcolm X.
Why?
Because what he was saying and the way he was saying it was too blunt. It was dangerous. And you didn't say those things in those days. I told you, we had been socialized as kids to get around wrong, not to confront it. And Malcolm spoke in very declarative terms, and he said some terrible things about white people that we thought, but you would never express it, you see. He talked about the way this country was not a democracy but a hypocrisy, and he talked about what had been happening to us down south and up south. And he was not shy. He had and he was very, very intimidating. I'm man enough to admit it. There are a lot of people who are my age who will speak, with love about Malcolm as though it had always been that way. But that's not so. He scared a lot of us to death. And then, mind you, I had this apartment, a bachelor apartment on Convent Avenue, and I'd been having a lot of fun, And here he comes talking about a different way of life. First of all, he dropped his last name. Well, we had been socialized to take great pride in our last name. The more European it sounded, the better. There was not a flinch about, Noble. Oh, that's wonderful. If it wasn't French enough, you'd put an ETT on it, to make it sound more French. And so here's a man who dropped his good last name and replaced it with an X. I thought the man was crazy. And then he talked about discipline. And he talked
self-discipline?
Self-discipline. He said that we do not believe in drinking. And at the time I would have a taste. And he said that we don't smoke cigarettes with or without a label on them. And I would smoke, with a label.
Yes.
And he said, we don't eat pork. Well, I love me some ribs. And then he said, we don't fornicate.
Yes.
And so psychologically, I said, Malcolm, I'll see you later.
Yes.
And all. But what he was doing in deprecating whiteness, I came to understand later that he was rearranging the balance that we needed, because we had glorified whiteness and deprecated blackness. And so he was tilting, using exaggerated term, to give us a sense of self and to take whites down a little as they needed to be. And the discipline that he was talking about were things that we really needed to address. But I couldn't swallow that at the time. So jumping forward in time, a lot of things happened in the struggle, and Malcolm was struck down in '65, and I never went to hear him speak. My only impression of Malcolm was on the sound bites on the evening news. And if there was a rally in Harlem, where I'm living now, I'm living in Harlem, and he would have a rally 10 blocks away, I would go in the other direction.
Did he have a mosque there?
He had a mosque on 116th Street, and I didn't live too far away from there. But I went out of my way to avoid this man because I thought he was wrong. I had a white friend who was going to Princeton, and he called my wife and I one weekend, and he said, could you put me up over the weekend, because Malcolm X just came down to Princeton. And I never heard anything like that in my life. Blue eyes, pale skin, blonde hair. Could you put me up? I said, well, you can come on up here if you want to, So he came up, and Sunday morning, he said, okay, I'm ready to go.
No, it wasn't finished. You cut it off too soon. I was just taking... All right.
And so we had a big argument. I said, I'm not going to go there. Do you realize what he's been saying about you and your people? That's anathema to me. And we had a big argument, and he walked off and went down there on his own. And he came back whiter than when he left.
I bet he did.
Because he said that he had been put in a segregated section with no chairs. The white people had to stand. And Malcolm came out there and poured boiling oil over their whiteness, informationally. It was more intense than what he had done at Princeton, because in Princeton he had just demolished the heads of the academic departments there, theology, history, and whatnot. But here he was talking in more graphic terms, and he really gave this fella, Don Emerson, who we were friendly with, a shellacking. I said, I told you shouldn't have gone. And I said, the man is crazy, and I don't know why on earth you felt... And I was arrogant in my ignorance. And it wasn't until 1965, when he was assassinated, that there was a brother who lived in the projects. And he called me aside and he said,
I'll tell you why Malcolm was killed. I said, what do you mean? He said, coming up to my apartment. So I went and he gave me a recording he had made of Malcolm at one of his speeches. And so for the first time I heard Malcolm unedited, in context.
That was a lot of us,
Yeah.
you know, and a lot of us in the 60s. I myself personally, I was just like Gil, you know, it was integration time, you know, integration. I mean, in New York in particular. I mean, it was a new thing to go, you know, hang out with white people. They were coming up to Harlem and we were partying like crazy, and there was no segregation in New York. And we got to know each other better, especially the Jewish community. I mean, we were a little closer to them, right? Throughout my existence, Jewish people have always been close out of all the whites. And what does it seem like reviewing your father like that? Well, you knew all this anyway, right?
Yeah, I lived it with him.
Right?
It's always beautiful to hear him speak, but, you know, that's what slavery was designed to do, was to take our Africanness out of us and put something else in us that wasn't our natural state. So it's not surprising we had to rebuild ourselves, re-inoculate ourselves with the truth and a sense of knowledge of self and knowledge of our Africanness. And the system is designed to make sure that that doesn't happen. So, you know, it's not surprising that it took people a long time to really open up to Malcolm, because a lot of us aren't in our natural state. So you can't understand what's going on unless you understand who you are.
Right.
And where you come from in your history and the greatness of our history as Africans. So it's going on today. I mean, you know, we see it today, and, you know, the residue of our history affects us today. And all of us are dealing with it. So we just have to keep trying to share information, because, you know, one of the major things that slavery accomplished was disrupting our ability to pass on information from generation to generation. That just stopped. And so we stopped. You know, there's all these barriers to prevent us from getting the information. It's so funny because, you know, today we have this social media blitz, and, you know, we have the proliferation of all these media formats. So we're getting a lot more, but we're not seeing what we're getting or understanding what we're getting more clearly. So it's really a genius technique to the system, because they said, well, we can't prevent people from really finding out this information because it's out there.
Especially now.
But if we plant their appetites in them when they're young, then they can have this information right around them and they won't even have the appetite to receive it. That's the genius of what's happening today.
What about your father's archives? All the stuff that he did over those 40 years? What is it?
45 years.
45 years.
Joe Fleming, who was his attorney, who passed away a year, excuse me, a year after my father passed away, unfortunately. Great man. Won a lawsuit with ABC, and my father has full control of his work.
That's good.
All the Like It Is shows and the documentaries, and we're going through some steps now to transfer all the film to digital format.
Beautiful.
And to make it available to the world. So that was, aside from the work that he did, probably the greatest accomplishment was getting ownership, because that's something that we never do as a people, own things.
He told me on the show here, you know, because this is public access, and we have no commercials, and I own my property.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And at the time, he said, you're lucky, you own all your stuff.
Right.
And I said, I thought about it, I said, that's right. And it's only now do you have control of it after so many years.
Yeah.
And he was here in 204 and 5 and 203. Had him on 4 times. But that was such a pleasure having him on. I mean, he was really my idol.
Well, I tell you, being his son was an incredible experience.
I'm sure it was.
You know, I remember the early days in the 60s when he was bringing me to the set, and I would be sitting there, you know, and having conversations with Stokely Carmichael and Mary McKeever, H. Rap Brown, you name it, the who's who of the black architecture of the world. He had on the show, and so it was just an astonishing experience. I didn't really understand it. It took a while before
you realized how blessed you were.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it, but he brought me to the Like It Is set on numerous occasions and took me out to speaking engagements, and so I was very blessed to touch these people. He took me to see Sarah Vaughan. I touched Sarah Vaughan. He took me to see Oscar Peterson. I shook Oscar Peterson's hand. You know, I met these.
Tell me, your father played the piano. A lot of people don't know that.
My father was a Renaissance man.
Amen.
He's just so much talent. He was an incredible pianist, and would play actually before he.
You have any video of him playing the piano?
No, but he did cut a record.
Okay.
And before he got the job at LIB, he had the Gil Noble Trio.
Oh, really?
And he was performing around Harlem. And he told me one day that he was playing, his trio was playing, and then, you know, in comes Errol Garner, who was his idol. And he said he almost threw up. He said he was just beside himself.
Yeah.
And but he was able to compose himself, and he said that he and Errol spoke, and Errol said some kind words towards him. But it's an amazing thing, and you know, I'm reflecting back on the relationships and the things that really shape us as individuals. And one of the things that, you know, he told me a story when he used to work for WLIB. Bill McQuarrie was the news director, and Ali had just won the championship.
Right.
And was at a restaurant in Harlem, and Bill sent him down to cover the story. So he got down there, and there was a sea of white reporters. The whole worldwide press was there. And they were all, you know, itching to get the first interview with Ali. And Ali looked out, and, you know, my father wasn't known then. He was just a black face in the back of the crowd. And Ali looked out, and he said, and the whole sea of reporters had to part for my father to come through, and they're looking at him like, who is this guy? And, you know, my father got into the restaurant. He said, thank you, Mr. Ali. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. And Ali just looked at him and said, don't worry about it, brother. Just make sure you pass on the favor. And my father said to me, you know who taught him that? Malcolm. But my father, he had such an impact on my father. My father said that Ali taught him to love his blackness. Ali. Yeah. And he taught him to be proud of being black. And so my father never forgot that lesson as far as always looking out for your own. He was so impressed that someone in his early 20s had that sort of mindset. Your people first. And it had a tremendous impact on my father. So these are the things that happen through life that shape you as far as how you think and how you behave. And it was a very an important process of my father transitioning to what he became. through
Yeah.
all of these relationships that he had with Dr. Ben, with Dr. Clark, with all of these people, had such a tremendous effect on him, and it shaped him. So he didn't do it on his own. It's a family effort.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ali was our age, a year younger than us.
He's younger than us.
Ali was
Ali,
younger than us.
yeah.
And I boxed at the time. Everybody
Oh, really?
boxed. Yeah, you had to. My brother was a boxer. He caught me when I was, 11 years old, and beat me up in the hallway. I said, oh, man, come on, man. He said, man, you better learn how to fight, man. So I went over to PL in the Bronx and learned how to box. I was 11 years old. I weighed 100 pounds. And that's what we did in those days. You were a gentleman, and that's what your father was, a gentleman. And you got in a fight, you knocked the guy out, and then you help him off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's where we treated each other. We were family. We got in an argument, we fought, and the better man won. And
And that
today
was it.
it's...
But Ali was out there in people's face saying, I'm beautiful, I'm the greatest.
That's it.
And that was
But
unheard
see,
of.
most boxers were ugly anyway.
Yeah, but just to put the spotlight on blackness and say it's beautiful. And he was all about knowledge of self and understanding who you were as an African.
And he was pretty, and he could really hit you.
And he was great. He was, to me, he was, I mean, if you listen to some interviews with Ali was
Genius.
a genius, articulate, and I mean, had courage
was.
and amazing. I have a poster in my home, a big poster of Ali that I framed that says Ali's greatest fights were outside of the ring.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Chris, a question I have as relates to your dad spending the time that he did, and I'm talking about how long he stayed on his post in the Like It Is show. What do you see, what did you see while he was doing this work? Quite oftentimes being away from home, and then his staying on his post as long as he did, and how did you see it then, and how do you see his sacrifice or his work now, today, in the absence of Like It Is?
Well, my father was extremely disciplined and focused. And so what you saw on Sunday was the man that he was. He walked the walk and talked the talk, and went through a tremendous sacrifice to do what he did. He used to tell me, stories that most of the generous comments that he got at ABC usually came from the maintenance people and the security people who were black. He said the corporate black structure at ABC used to have a hands-off approach to him because they didn't want to be associated with his with the way he thought. But my father used to we used to take walks in New York, and when people used to always come up to him in the streets and say, Gil, and my father would always say, go stand over there. And I would have to go stand over like a couple steps away, and then he would go address the individuals. And, he did that because he was constantly getting threats. And I'll tell you another story. I'm a graduate from Lincoln University. And we had, for Black History Month, I had my father come up and speak at Lincoln, and it was a big deal. The whole school knew about him, and he got up there and took me out to dinner before the event. And he said, Chris, I just want to let you know that someone called my office and said that they knew where I was going, and I was going to blow the place up.
You were going to...
That they were going to blow the...
That they were going to blow the place up.
Okay.
They knew where he was going. And he said, but after, careful consideration and also the fact that I didn't want to disappoint you, I came. But he was telling me that just, I guess, in case something happened, that I would, but just think about, those are things that I bumped into, so that meant that these things were going on all the time, that he never discussed with the family. I bumped into a few circumstances where I knew that, you know, what he was going through, but there was no negotiating his path. His path was what he did, and he wasn't going to deviate from that. And so what I saw was a man who was who loved his people, who loved being an African, and who was on a mission, who was a warrior, who was a freedom fighter, and who had tremendous courage and tremendous strength, and just an incredible man. I mean, an incredible man, and I admire. You know, I'm just like you and you. I mean, I'm sitting here. I witnessed it, but you know, I'm so far from that caliber of an individual, and I say that, and I'm very comfortable with that.
But you are who you are.
I am who I am,
and you're destined to do what you're going to do.
You know, but it's funny. You know, we all can't be Nelson Mandela. We all can't be Malcolm.
That's right.
So you have to be comfortable with where you are.
That's right.
And I can say that my father was so talented and so focused, and the work that he did was so effective. I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing. I have to do my part, and I'm comfortable with that. But I can, and I don't have any reservations about saying that you know, if I end up being half the man my father was, I would be happy.
You actually are, DNA-wise.
Well, it's not about DNA, really. It's about what you do, what kind of legacy you leave. Like when you leave, what are you leaving? Are you just, are we going to leave with just material possessions, or are we going to leave a legacy of work that has affected our people in a positive way? So that's what I'm working towards.
Your job now is to make sure that legacy is seen by the world.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
That's your calling.
And to engage also, not only to make sure his work is seen, but to get my hands dirty, which I've been doing, and getting involved in the community, and you know.
Tell us what you're doing now.
I am speaking. Doing public speaking.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I just got out of federal prison.
Okay.
And,
you want to tell us why?
Well, I'm not going to get into specifics of the case, but I would say that I made a mistake.
Okay.
And, you know, I went through the legal system, and they did a hatchet job on me, as they do all black men.
Okay.
And so what ends up happening is you get a lot more time than you should get.
Right. Okay.
And so I was in federal prison for 4 years. And
that's a long time for federal prisoners.
Well, no.
Short time.
No, there's federal prisoners. I mean, there's people that are in there for life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I got 4 years, and that was for what I was involved in. That was a lot more time than I should have gotten.
Okay.
But I made a mistake, and I owned it.
Okay.
So I decided to turn a very negative situation into a positive situation. And when I got into prison, my bunkie, which is the closest relationship you could have in prison, is the man. We lived in bunk beds, and I lived on top of this man. He was the head of the Nation of Islam. And that was like God saying, I got you. Because I had grown up having a close relationship with Minister Farrakhan's family. His sons used to spend weekends at my house. I used to spend weekends at his house in New Rochelle, and also went to hear the minister speak on numerous occasions. So I was very familiar with the work that the nation was doing. And so anyway, we bonded right away. And I started studying under him, and then in about a half a year, I ended up joining the nation. And that was a privilege because it enabled me to work very closely with all the black inmates.
Okay.
And I also met another brother who was in charge of putting on all the Black History events, and we bonded, and he had done 15 years, and he got out. And before he got out, he came to me and said, listen, I would love for you to take over this duty, because I know that you would do the right thing with it.
Right, right.
So within the first year I was in, I was in charge of putting on all the Black History events in the prison. And within a year and a half, my bunkie, who was the head of the nation, left, and the brothers voted because of my profile was, had been going up in the prison, that they voted me to be the head of the nation, which was an astonishing thing for me. And what that did was it enabled me to have access to the chapel 5 times a week. And we had a locker with all the ministers' tapes and literature. And I opened up Juma service on Friday to all the black inmates. And I had Christians, Moors, 5%ers, everybody. Everybody was, if you were black, we wanted you to come in.
Right.
And I started putting on all these events, and I would write, booklets and give them out at these events. And, to get the prisoners to stay in their seats for, for 3-4 hours was a challenge at first. So, I developed ways of putting on these events. I had music, I had food.
Mm-hmm.
So I would give them information in doses. So, as you know, I had a very close relationship with Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and he was mentoring me while I was in, and would recommend books for me to read. And he got me some of my father's documentaries.
Yeah, I was supplying the tapes.
Yeah, and so what I would do is give these events and show a documentary, and they
That's
just
great.
loved it. I had
Yeah.
Malcolm, Paul Robeson, jazz, essay on drugs. They saw all of these different documentaries, and these brothers didn't know who Paul Robeson was, and it was beautiful to share this information with them and for them to be able to see these things. And so I would give these events and do some music, because you got to be very clever. So I had some music, I had food, I would show a documentary, and then we'd have speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was helping other brothers, I was helping myself.
Okay.
So it was the experience was unfortunate because I went in a couple of months before my father passed away. So that was like
ripping. A couple of months
ripping.
before.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that was like ripping
that's
my
right,
heart out of
that's
my
right.
body.
Oh my goodness.
And I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. So that was, I had to dig down deep. I had to tap into my African ancestry and draw from that strength. And but I'm stronger, wiser for it. And, I experienced the whole plantation atmosphere. It really, when you go through that, you have a much deeper understanding of what's going on. I mean, when you see, I worked 7 days a week, I made $20 a month. And so it's like working on a plantation.
Yeah.
And you see all of these brothers who are brilliant and talented, and they just ended up.
But you come from royalty, and then
Doesn't matter.
I'm saying suddenly you're exposed to slavery.
Well, no, my father from day one had always exposed me to slavery. So
No, I'm saying
I had a very unusual, but my father didn't raise me that way. My father exposed the truth to me at a very early age, and I had a full understanding, and he took me to events. Like it was mandatory viewing every Sunday from when I was a kid.
Okay.
So I grew up with a full understanding, very unusual, because I had all of these different worlds colliding that made me who I am. I had this street side to me because, you know, when you're in a certain world, usually you get attracted to another world.
Yeah.
So, and the system is always pulling at us in the wrong way. The system glorifies negative behavior and crime and getting high and doing these things. Right. So these are, no matter where you come from, you can be pulled into that.
Easily.
And so, you know, none of us are impervious to this system that we live in. So, you know, I made a mistake and I owned it and I paid up and I paid my price for it, and I'm stronger and wiser for it.
Okay.
And I have a much deeper understanding of the prison system, and it's something that you can't even imagine. And to see these brothers getting 15, 20 years for these crimes that, I mean, for nothing. One brother, this Jamaican brother, he's still in, got 15 years for selling weed, when now it's legal. Every day he was in prison saying, I can't believe I got 15 years, and they're legalizing this stuff.
Yeah.
And then you see what's going on in our political and corporate structures, where these corporations are, you know, stealing billions of dollars, and they're paying fines and not even admitting guilt. And then you got brothers on the streets who are low-level offenders. They're not bringing the drugs in. They're not bringing the guns into this country. They ended up doing what they did out of circumstance to survive. And so it's important to really understand that, because I think a lot of people don't understand why we behave the way we do. You know, young people, we don't come out of our mother's womb with a Glock, ready to hold up a liquor store and shoot each other. That comes out of a condition that's created for us, and we're affected by that condition.
You understand the youth today? I mean, you understand why they kill each other the way we do?
Well, you know, it's the residue of history.
Okay.
And so what's been happening now is, you know, we're talking about my father and Like It Is. There's no more Like It Is on TV now. So what kids are looking at Love and Hip Hop, Basketball Wives. These shows glorify our worst behavior.
That's right.
And they're normalizing this behavior.
Right.
These are, if you look at these shows, and listen, in prison, every Monday at 8 o'clock, when Love and Hip Hop came on, it was like church. All the brothers were in front of that TV watching the show. And I was there too, because when you're in there, you have to jail with your brothers. So I was there, and on Wednesday night for Empire at 9 o'clock, church. Everybody was in front of that TV with some food, and we were watching these shows. But the thing is, I could look at it and understand what was going on.
But you had that history.
And I would tell brothers, and they'd say, man, no, you always coming at us so serious. But I would kind of break down, like, you know, what was going on. But, you know, the thing is that they're normalizing this behavior. These are brothers that are going out, you know, cheating on, you know, their wives, their girlfriends. They're fighting, girls going out punching, throwing drinks at each other. This is what is feeding our youth. And there's no balance of a Like It Is, of a Tony Brown journal, of a McQuarrie Report, Positively Black. Those shows are gone. You know, I remember sitting down watching a show with my father with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Ben, and they're talking about the nuclear bombing of the African brain. And the colonization of the mind, body, and spirit of the African. Where do you get that sort of conversation nowadays? You don't get that. So this system has been very effective in making sure that we have as little access to this sort of thinking and information as possible. So it's not surprising that things are the way they are, but the main thing is to understand is that the behavior comes out of a condition. You know, we have a president who talks about all the crime in Chicago. Why? But what's happening in Chicago? What's happening in Chicago is that there's no jobs, there's a broken school system, there is a massive heroin problem.
That's right.
And what they're doing is they're locking all the brothers up. There was a documentary on, and they went into Cooks County prison, and you had all these excuse me, all these brothers locked up for all these petty crimes. And these brothers aren't selling drugs to have a Rolex watch or drive a Mercedes Benz. They're doing it to feed their family.
Right.
And they were talking about, then they interviewed these white suburban kids in Chicago who come into the neighborhoods and buy drugs. And they say, yeah, we get caught and the cops just tell us don't come back anymore. But they're locking up all these brothers.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these brothers who are not with their wife and not with their kids. So that kills the whole black family structure. And then you have, so you're living in a jungle that was created for you. And then you're trying to survive. It's like, you know, Malcolm always said, you break my arm and you break my leg and you wonder why I'm not winning the race. That's what they do to us.
That's right.
They set these systems up that put us in, that set these conditions up for us, and then we act to those conditions and they say, well, why are you acting like that? Doesn't make any sense. I understand why things are the way they are. I understand why kids are committing crime. When you have a system that dangles materialism and wealth in your face 24/7,
Right.
and doesn't give you the proper avenue to get it the right way,
Right.
you're gonna get it by any means necessary.
Yeah.
A man's manhood is judged by his ability to make money. How much money? That's how you're judged.
You provide for your family.
So black men want to feel like men.
That's right.
We want women. The media tells women, well, you got to have a man who has a nice car and a Rolex and take you here and these brothers, how they going to do that? So you dangling this carrot in front of everybody, and then you have a system that's set up with a horrible education system, a horrible criminal system, and you have all these layers that break down the family structure. You have a poor education system, and then you wonder why things are the way they are. Doesn't make any sense. I completely understand. And these brothers are brilliant and talented. A lot of these brothers, I'm telling you, in prison, there are brothers that were way more smarter than me, that were drug dealers that could have been running a Fortune 500 company.
Wow. All the good minds.
But they, when you walk out your door and it's about survival, and you don't have positive role models around you, you know, this is what you're going to do. What you got to do to survive, and what you see in your immediate environment, that's what's going to shape you. So, if you have an environment that's positive, where there's a good education system and people are going to school and there's jobs and there's programs, then your people are going to thrive. If you have an environment that's poisonous, what do you expect to come out of that poisonous environment? If you have a garden and you don't feed that soil, what's going to come out of the soil?
That's right.
So, you know.
What's the answer? How do we solve all these problems?
I mean,
more exposure to your father's archives.
More that's important, but the family structure, we got to get back to family.
That's it.
You know, I got the information I got. If it wasn't for my father, I would have been a completely different man.
Of course.
Completely
all
different.
Of us, really.
And my father was shaped by the people around him. Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, Dr. Ivan Van Cern, all the people that he associated with shaped him. That's what it's about.
Let's go back to play the second half of Gil and take the Gilchrist experience down.
The media's coverage of
awful.
Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful. And so I learned about Malcolm, and I realized that I had been had. I realized that
You
I
had bought what the media had told you.
Yes, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But when I heard Malcolm's entire presentation, everything fell in line, and it was logical. And it made me understand that there's no sin in being angry. In fact, if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you.
And why do you think Malcolm was killed?
I think
real issues.
I think that there are a number of reasons why he was killed. And it's a very, very painful reality that we need to deal with. He was a threat to America's global ambitions. He had done a lot in Africa to awaken the African countries and let them understand that they should not be a victim of the courtship that American businesses were engaged in, the Peace Corps and all these things, because they don't love you. They want your minerals. If they did, look what they're doing to us, and we're your brothers and sisters. Look what they're doing to us in, you know, Mississippi and whatnot. And so many of them began to quote Malcolm on the floor of the United Nations, ironically. So I think that that's one dimension that the State Department, and they tried to kill him when he was in Egypt. They tried to they poisoned him, but he had his stomach pumped and he survived. So that was one dimension. Then there were the authorities here in this country that also wanted him to leave this life. And then there was a lot of factionalism within the Nation of Islam. And there was a lot of greed, there was a lot of ambitiousness, and there was a lot of friction, because the Nation of Islam had grown into an economic colossus.
And self-sufficiency.
They were self-sufficient.
The same things that your parents practiced.
Exactly. And they were a threat. They had their own schools, they had their own religion,
Food.
They had their own name, their own diet. They were self-sufficient. And that was a threat.
Big time.
And so I think that there are some people who were in the nation who, see, many of the people who had been fished by Malcolm into joining the nation had been on the street like he had. And a lot of them, as the money started to come in, some of the old temptations began to take over. I interviewed a man, Talmadge Hayer, in prison, and he told me that he thought that Malcolm was a hypocrite and that he was wrong in bad-mouthing Elijah. He told me this on camera. Mm-hmm. And he told me how they went about assassinating him, and, you know, how determined they were to take him out.
He really believed it, you think?
Oh, he really did. He thought, and the more Malcolm protested, the angrier they became. And so he took me right through. He was one of the gunmen. He had a pistol, and he described how there were 3 gunmen. 1 had a rifle and 2 had pistols. Mm-hmm. He was one of the gunmen. The rifle went off first and struck down Malcolm, and the 2 men with revolvers went up to the stage and emptied their revolvers. Mm-hmm. And he told me that he was convinced that he had done the right thing, you know. And I asked him, I said, in your life, have you ever so much as spat at a member of the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan? Or did you ever smack one? And he dropped his head and he said, no.
Did he understand the meaning of that question, do you think?
I made it clear.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that it wasn't until years later, while in prison, that he came to understand that Malcolm was not lying, he was not wrong, and that there was corruption. And he had a nervous breakdown in prison because he realized that who he had taken off.
Yes, exactly.
You know? So, I mean, this was just a very, very painful experience, and it's something that we are not yet wrestling with. I don't want to get overly philosophical, but I just wanted to respond to your question that Malcolm had a tremendous impact on me after he was dead.
Afterwards.
Yes.
All right. Like all of us, Malcolm had an effect on us after he died. All right, there's much more to continue about this, but Leroy has an announcement to make. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Where was that clip from? Who was the interviewer? It seemed like a Like It Is show.
Yeah, no, it was a sister. I forgot her name. I forgot the sister's name. I've seen the whole interview.
The 12 minutes.
In its entirety, yeah.
Okay.
It's a good, very good interview. I'll get that information to you.
The announcement is relating to the book published by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1973, which is entitled The Fall of America. And there's a panel discussion at Muhammad Mosque number 7, which is on West 127th Street, this Saturday, July 15th at 2:30 p.m. There's a reception at 3 p.m. There's a panel, and that panel consists of Brother James McIntosh, Brother Imam Abu, Sister J.E. Franklin, who's an author, and Minister Abdul Hafiz Muhammad. It's free to the community. It's for the purpose of assessing his forecast in the Fall of America book and determining whether he's right on point or if he's way ahead of his time, and what we should do, regardless of what that assessment is by the panel, what we should be doing, black families, to save our black youth and save our families. So it's Saturday, July 15th, 127th Street and Malcolm X Boulevard. That's where Muhammad Mosque number 7 is. It's a community meeting.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Let me just add on, piggyback on what this gentleman just said. I'm giving, in the process of putting together a big event in honor of my father on October 14th at Aaron Davis Hall at City College. And
we're going out in 8 seconds.
Okay.
I'm sorry we didn't have time to do that. Power to the people. God bless. The God in me loves the God in you. Just taste it.
Thank you.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day, while the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor. He was telling you, build your own house.